Hey there, my lovely listeners. Today I am joined by Deborah Maragopoulos, an integrative family nurse practitioner with over 30 years of experience in neuro-immune endocrinology. Deborah has dedicated her career to blending the science of medicine with the art of healing, focusing on the critical role of the hypothalamus in overall health. She is the author of the Hypothalamus Handbook, a comprehensive guide for individuals looking to optimize their hypothalamus function independently. Throughout our conversation, we delve into the pivotal role of the hypothalamus in regulating reproductive function, metabolism, and hormone balance. Deborah sheds light on the often overlooked connection between hypothalamic dysfunction and various health issues, including infertility, PCOS, addiction, and even learning disorders. We also explore practical strategies and testing for diagnosing hypothalamic dysfunction, the benefits of hormone replacement therapy, and lifestyle changes to enhance hypothalamus health. Additionally, Deborah discusses the impact of hypothalamus regulation on chronic fatigue syndrome and overall well-being, offering valuable insights into achieving hormone harmony and optimal health at any age. I learned so much from Deborah in this conversation, and I have no doubt you will too. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Deborah. Thank you
Hi.
so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You are so accomplished. You've written multiple books. It's going to be a really good, juicy convo about all things hypothalamus and fertility and periods. It's going to be so good. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
Yes. I was saying that to you before we started recording that I love talking to my community about the fact that your period starts in your brain because the hypothalamus and the pituitary orchestrate this entire menstrual cycle that we have going on with those instruction hormones, FSH and LH, telling the ovaries what to do. And I was so thrilled that I got to actually, or I get to talk to you about all of this today. And I wanted to start with your personal story about how you got into this work, because I believe you have a pretty crazy story about childbirth and that being the impetus for you to learn everything about hormones. Is that right?
I do, but I'm gonna prelude it with a lack of period story myself.
Oh, yes, by
So
all
at
means.
14, I started an eating disorder, anorexia. And so I'm 63 years old. So at the time they didn't even know what it was. And the pediatrician was like, just well, make her eat. And she goes, well, she won't eat. But it stopped my periods. So I had had a period for about a year. I lost 20 pounds, stopped my periods. So then fast forward to, and then I'm struggling with eating disorders, eating disorder through high school into college. Fast forward, I get married about, I don't know, maybe 5 months into my marriage. I'd been with this person, high school sweetheart, for a long time. I decide it's time to get pregnant because I have a dream that I'm going to have a baby, except I have no periods. I
Yeah.
have no periods.
Yeah, that's a slight
So
problem,
I
slight
had to have my
hindrance.
period started with progesterone injections, and it was just a mess. So I had this dream, and I gained 5 pounds that month, and I conceive. Now, because I was so underweight, I mean, really seriously underweight, and so malnourished because of my starving myself, the baby didn't have the best of chances. So I had preeclampsia, which developed later in the pregnancy. I was about 30 weeks when I developed preeclampsia, which is toxemia, high blood pressure. I started having seizures. My liver started failing. I went into kidney failure. I went into an intensive care. They're trying to keep the baby from being born because the baby has intrauterine growth retardation because not enough nutrition. Baby's born. They're at 31 weeks, 2.5 pounds. That's way too small, as ambiguous genitalia. Now, I had a dream that I had a baby boy, blonde hair. And if you can see me now, I do not have blonde hair, I have dark hair. My husband is Greek, I'm Italian. We don't have blondes in our family, but this blonde hair baby is born, but genitalia is ambiguous. So this was an intersex child that with terminology was not back in 1984. So the doctors at the time said, okay, we don't have much to work with here. Why don't you raise this child as a girl, and then we'll take out the gonads later and we'll give the child hormones and you'll raise the child as a girl. And I said, wait a second. This baby its brain has been exposed to hormones of the male gender, a lot of testosterone. So what's going to happen with their identity, their gender identity, who they believe themselves to be? I don't think we should cut anything out. I don't think we should change anything. I think we should just do anything medical. And the child had huge hiatal hernia, so that had to be fixed. And then we had to deal with the gonads at that time at about 5 months of age. But we need to just not disturb what's going on here and let the child decide later. That was a blow for medicine. They didn't do that then, but that's what they do now. Okay, so I was before my time, but I was going with my mother's intuition, like this doesn't feel right at all. And so then I had to navigate my child's health care at the age of 23, fresh out of nursing school. So I go and become a nurse practitioner, learn about hormones, learn about receptor sites, learn about, at that time, we thought it was just pituitary issues. They also had growth hormone issues. And we thought it was just testosterone issues. The receptor site wasn't receiving testosterone, so they had partial androgen insensitivity. Well, that's what they thought it was, but I knew there was more here. And so I dove into hormones because I had to, because I was a mom.
Yeah.
So the story into the hypothalamus goes a little bit farther, but that's why I'm interested in what I am in. And you'll see that in most healthcare providers. The eye doctor, has the thickest glasses. And the psychiatrists and psychologists usually have either their own issues or people in their family have issues. I mean, we all have something that gives us passion for what we do.
Truly. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely did not expect that coming. I was, so,
Well,
I was thinking
I don't
there was
usually
like
mention
some sort of
things
traumatic
like that.
childbirth experience, but
Yeah.
not quite that. But that, I mean, you're completely blowing my mind. I mean, am I allowed to ask what you ended up doing? Like what you did in the long term
Yeah.
for
So
your
in the
child?
short term, because I had no medical support and I was fighting the system, and we had an HMO at the time. My husband was a police officer, and it's the best insurance we could get. And I literally had to fight the system. And God bless you all who have to fight a medical system that have no medical training.
Done
Okay.
that.
It
Yes.
was difficult for me, and I had the training and the ability to research and I knew people at UCLA because that's where I was trained. So I was able to pull cards. So what we did, and this is getting kind of down and dirty, but I've again had another dream that if we gave this baby a little testosterone, that there would be a little more development. And I had contacted a urologist that I worked with as a nursing student who was doing the first transsexual switch, basically transitional surgeries. Okay. At UCLA, very first, we're talking early 80s, starting the surgeries from male to female, female to male. And because the gonads were inside of the belly, which is where they start in a little boy and a little girl, okay, but they have to come down through the inguinal canals and land in a scrotal sac. This baby hadn't developed that. There was no scrotal sac. There was just what looked like a little clitoral bud and a little linea, a little line that hadn't invaginated, that's female, nor had it poofed back out as a scrotal sac. It was just kind of stuck at that 8-week fetal period. So the physician said, I can't do anything with these gonads. We either take them out, I have nothing to put them in. And that's when I had the dream. Give the baby testosterone and let's see if the scrotal sac will develop. And it did. So the child got 2 testosterone injections, very young. And over a 2-month period of time, the little clitoral bud started growing a little bit. And the labia, what looked like immature labia, poofed out and made a scrotal sac. So now the doctor had something to put the gonads in. Okay. We knew the gonads were testes, but the baby was resistant to its own androgen. So it wasn't masculizing. So that worked great. And so because we didn't want to take the gonads away, we didn't want to assume a female or a male. We needed to preserve them, but we had no place to put them. And once he closed those inguinal canals, that hernia, there's no getting them out. So he says, I got to put them somewhere or I'd have to take them.
Oh, wow.
So that's what we did. That was the first medical surgery that we did. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So we had to do with the inguinal hernia. So the hernias were so big. I don't know if you've ever had a baby that's constipated and you bicycle their little legs and push their little legs into their belly to poop every single time with this little baby because they couldn't poop. They had they'd put us down and all these hernias would balloon out. And So yeah, it needed to be done. And we waited 5 months because the baby wasn't big enough for anesthesia. So at 5 months, the baby weighed 5 pounds and could have anesthesia.
Okay. Wow.
So
Thank you for
that's what
that.
we did in the short term. And then
Yeah.
we just let the child develop mentally however they developed. In the beginning, very ambiguous. Verbal skills were really, really strong, talked really early, but motor skills were kind of behind, seemed to follow more of a female pattern, very interested in everything. And I can't say it was truly female. My husband's an amazing cook. But back then there wasn't kitchens, little play kitchens. So my husband made a kitchen for the baby. And the pediatric endocrinologists have fit and said, listen, you can't force a female gender identification on this child if you're going to raise it male. I said, we just have testes there. The baby has an ambiguous name. They can go either way. My husband's a cook, so it doesn't really matter. We trade jobs here. There's no male or female role in this family. So the baby they just want to do this. They want to cook like daddy.
Yeah.
So all that idea of like socialization, gender affirmation, and then what's going on with the genitalia was like we were living this in real time back in the mid 80s. So, and there was no guidance, there were no books, there was nothing out there. Intersexuality didn't become a term until the 90s. So I was just going with my intuition. And the baby also had growth hormone issues, didn't grow. So again, I was like, maybe we could give the baby growth hormone injections, even though they were making growth hormone, maybe they also have growth hormone receptor site insensitivity. They didn't even know how to test for that, but that was my guess. Again, I'm not even a nurse practitioner yet, trying to guide them into this process. And I said, let's just try the growth hormone injections and see what happens and see if the baby grows. Because at this point, they're going to be 4'2" tall. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and it worked. I mean, they got to 5'4". So anyhow, at this point, my eldest child is truly intersex and is living a non-binary life. They're like one of the first non-binary citizens in California. They challenged, the court system to get a non-binary gender on their ID, and so it has done a lot in the social and psychological aspects related to intersexuality. And then we just have tried to stay as open as possible. And they went through, phases that looked more masculine, but I don't know, is playing Ninja Turtles a boy thing? Because my 4-year-old granddaughter who wears pink Aurora dresses does karate ninja moves and loves that. So what is male? What is female at this young age?
Right. Absolutely. This
So.
was such a fascinating story. I really do appreciate you sharing that, though. Like I said, that was not what I was expecting at all. And I feel like it really sets us up for this conversation about the hypothalamus and what it does and all of our hormone cascades that we experience in our bodies and all the things that are going on, more in the binary, but still, regardless, I think it works both ways. So can we just get back to maybe the basics and talk about what the hypothalamus is, its role in the body? Maybe start there.
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, your hypothalamus is in your brain. It's a little gland about the size of an almond in a shell. And if you put your finger between your eyebrows where your third eye would be and goes directly central in your brain, it's sitting right above the brain stem. It's also above the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland hangs from it. And it's not protected by the blood-brain barrier. And that's super important to know. Most doctors don't even realize this. It's because it's not protected because it needs to get information from blood all the time. What nutrients you need, it has nutrient sensors in there. Do you need more fat, more glucose, more protein? And also all your blood chemistry, but it's also exposed to toxins. It's exposed to funguses and bacteria and viruses. It's exposed to everything. So it's reading your blood all the time. That's one way that it figures out what's going on in your body. Its number one job is homeostasis, keeping balance in your body. And I call the hypothalamus the maestro of your symphony of hormones, neurotransmitters, and immune factors. So all those things that float in your blood feed back to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus then regulates whether you need more cortisol or less cortisol, more thyroid hormone or less thyroid hormone, whether it's time to stimulate ovulation or not. Everything is going through the hypothalamus. We thought it was the pituitary gland was the master gland, but we now know it's middle manager. The hypothalamus is the master gland. It also controls your nervous system. It is the master controller of the autonomic nervous system that controls heart rate, respiration. It controls like shivering. It controls bladder contractions, colon contractions, everything that you don't have to think about. That's the hypothalamus controlling that, okay? So a lot of hypertension and heart disease issue, metabolic syndromes are centered in hypothalamic dysfunction. So, and I know we're not talking about that, but most diseases are centered in hypothalamic dysfunction. And then the immune system. So it literally controls how the thymus programs your white blood cells to either protect you or attack you.
Wow. You know, I didn't
Attack you is
realize.
autoimmunity.
Oh, go ahead. Say that. Can you say that again?
So attacking you is autoimmunity. So it's very, very, and when we talk about the gut-brain connection, you've heard of that? It's
Oh, yeah.
not brain, it's gut-hypothalamus connection, which is in the brain, but that is the connection. It has a direct line. It actually receives some of the hormones from the gut and gets information. It receives information from your tongue when you're tasting things and how much bile you need to produce. That's all stimulated through the hypothalamus. It's not just your gut doing that work. And the microbiota in your gut talk to your hypothalamus through hormones and also through the autonomic nervous system. So the vagal nerve gives that information back to the hypothalamus, and the sympathetic nervous system of the autonomic, the one that stimulates things, talks back through the hypothalamus down to the gut. And then the gut also talks to your fat cells.
Oh, please elaborate on that one. That would be
So
good.
So your hypothalamus actually controls how much fat you're holding on to by communicating directly through the sympathetic nervous system to your fat cells and then receiving information from the hormone leptin. So there's a feedback loop, okay? And it's also getting information from how much food you're eating. And one of the things that causes dysfunction of the hypothalamus, listen up, audience, is overnutrition. You're eating too much, particularly fat and sugar will completely cause inflammation of the hypothalamus and mess up that whole natural feedback system between your hypothalamus and your fat cells. Okay. So I told you I had to gain 5 pounds in order to have that baby.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't have enough body fat. So that was my hypothalamus saying, you need some body fat because you're not reproducing because there's not enough body fat. Or you
Yeah.
have too much body fat and you're not going to be able to reproduce because this is not a safe environment and the body fat you're holding is inflammatory.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Because I think that the message that modern women get is, diet, exercise, and be a certain weight, all of the messaging that's inherently problematic in modern society when it comes to female bodies. And I feel like we are either on one end of the spectrum or the other, right? It's like either you're very thin or you're overweight, and we don't really get the message that you're talking about, that if you are underweight or overweight, that can really affect your fertility. And, as you said, right, in your experience, it stopped your period, hence the reason you couldn't have a baby because it stopped ovulation. So I don't know, can you elaborate on any of that? Because I think that there's this inherent belief that we're somehow broken or something, but it all obviously ties back to this delicate hormone balance that's tied back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary.
So your hypothalamus is your weight set point center. So your ideal weight is set in the hypothalamus. Now it'll change your ideal weight if it's been there for a while. So let's say your ideal weight is 125 pounds. That's the perfect weight for all your hormones to function normally. Okay, but it's really not the weight. It has more to do with body composition, how much lean body mass you have and how much body fat you have. Okay, for women, we need 20 to 24% body fat in order to have healthy reproductive system. If you have less than that, you're in the athletic fit zone, you may have issues with fertility. Which is what I was having because I was anorexic. If you have more than that, then you may have issues with fertility because the fat that women store when they're young and reproductive typically is brown fat. It's in your thighs and your buttocks and around your hips, and it's very metabolically active. That's why we call it brown. We look under the microscope, it has a lot of mitochondria and it's very brown. But white fat around your middle, which you see a lot of middle-aged people have, and people that tend to get overweight and they look like apples instead of pears, That white fat is highly inflammatory. It has very little mitochondria and is highly inflammatory. So if you have too much middle fat, that actually will decrease your ability to conceive because it's inflammatory and causing hypothalamic dysfunction. So
Right.
it's not so much your weight, it's your body fat. So your
Okay.
BMI doesn't mean anything. It's really body composition. So I want you to like let go of the scale. I had to let go of the scale and just forget that number because I have an eating disorder. And even though I'm not actively practicing, it's like being an alcoholic. It's always in my mind. So I go by my clothes and I go by my fitness level and I go by what I can pinch. But my body knows it needs more fat in order to then what my baseline was in my head, what I thought I needed to weigh, I needed a little bit more. And
Yeah.
that even
Okay.
happened later. I mean, I was in my late 30s and still after two babies, both situations, had to gain 5 pounds to conceive each one, no periods in between it all. Now the anorexia, bulimia turned into exercise obsession. So now I'm 12% body fat. I'm a triathlete, no periods, having to take bioidentical hormones just to get periods. And I finally develop a nutraceutical for the hypothalamus and I start taking it. I take myself off everything. I gain that same 5 pounds again. 2 months later, I start having periods. I had periods when I had no periods from the age of 14 on my own until 39. I had periods regularly until 56 when I went into menopause by supporting my hypothalamus. And I've had that extra 5 pounds. That is obviously my hypothalamus is this is your ideal body weight.
Right. So I just confirm with you what you just said about the hypothalamus
Mm-hmm.
setting the body weight metric for each of us. So
Mm-hmm.
basically it's the determiner of what your ideal body weight is
Mm-hmm.
ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and that body weight isn't going to be set for women until you're in your early 30s. And that's because weight wise, that's because that's when you've reached your full bone density, and bone weighs way more than muscle and muscle weighs way more than fat, volume by volume, right? So, for instance, I'll give you an example. So for instance, at the age of 18, my body weight was about 110 pounds. By the time I reached 32, my body weight was 122 pounds, but I was only 12% body fat. So I was underweight for my hypothalamus, but I had my maximum bone density at that point. So 12 more pounds of bone density. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I had lost a bunch of body fat because I was exercising too much. I had to put extra weight on 5 more pounds before I could, which was fat. I had needed some fat in order to make hormones so I could have periods without taking hormones.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's not so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
the weight, and I'm only 5'2". So that seems like a lot, but I have very thick bones. I have heavy bones. I'm very muscular. So I weigh more. So if I go by BMI, I'm overweight. Okay. If I go by my actual body composition, I'm even at 63, I'm about 23% body fat, which is actually under fat for a woman my age.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It
But
does.
I'm
And
talking about I weigh
yeah,
the same. It's just kind
right.
of transferred a little bit.
I also can't
So,
believe that
so the
anyone follows the
scale isn't
BMI
isn't that
anymore.
important.
Right. Yes. I was just saying that I can't believe anyone follows the BMI metric
Yeah.
anymore, but here we are. Um, so can you talk a little bit about signs and symptoms of hypothalamic dysfunction? I feel like you've covered some things for sure, but
Oh,
if someone's
absolutely.
listening, what can we be looking out for? What does it start with even?
So one of the early signs is temperature dysregulation. Your hypothalamus controls your temperature. So if everyone else around you is wearing a sweater and you're too hot, that's a sign, okay? Or you're cold all the time, that's a sign. Or you go between hot and cold. The classic hot flashes of menopause is classic hypothalamic dysfunction. But younger people have that too. They can't maintain their body temperature, hypothalamic dysfunction. Okay. Anytime you are doing everything you can to get your weight under control, you're eating well, you're exercising, you're sleeping well, you're doing your stress management, and you still can't get your weight under control, it's probably hypothalamic dysfunction called central obesity, meaning it's the master controller controlling what's going on. Gut disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, the colitis, constant constipation, indigestion, maldigestion, hypothalamic dysfunction. Any adrenal disorders, you're making too much cortisol, too little cortisol, not enough DHEA, too much DHEA, that's hypothalamic dysfunction. Thyroid disorders. If you feel like your thyroid's low, but your blood work isn't showing it, it's probably hypothalamic dysfunction. Or if your thyroid numbers don't match each other, your TSH isn't high when your T4 and T3 are low, or vice versa. Your TSH is too low, isn't low when your T4 and T3 are high. If both are low, let's say your T4 and T3 are at the low end of normal and your TSH is also at the low end of normal, that's miscommunication between hypothalamus, pituitary, and thyroid gland. That is central hypothyroidism or a hypothalamic dysfunction. If you have autoimmune conditions, you almost always have hypothalamic dysfunction. All the autoimmune conditions are centered there, including polycystic ovary syndrome is a metabolic disorder. We think of it as a reproductive disorder, but it's actually a metabolic disorder and is centered in the hypothalamus. And I'm saying all this now with a lot of research behind me, but I've been treating this for over 30 years with no research and going by my intuition. But now research in the last 10 years has caught up and has proven everything I've just told you. Aging is hypothalamic dysfunction. It's caused by hypothalamus microinflammation. The cells, the neurons are inflamed.
Can we talk about that though? What you said about
Yes.
menopause, the menopause piece and the aging thing, right? Because obviously the general understanding is aging happens and menopause happens. So I assume you're not saying that those are able to be stopped or reversed, or please elaborate. I want to hear your take on this.
Okay, so we can't stop the aging process, but we can slow it down and we can maximize the ability of your cells to continue to reproduce themselves. Okay,
Right.
and we can do that through, and I'll go over the 5 pillars of hypothalamus healing. But menopause is basically you run out of eggs. Okay, and if you're ovulating regularly for 30 to 35 years, you will run out of eggs. And once you run out of eggs, you're not going to make enough estrogen, and that triggers that hypothalamic dysfunction. The hypothalamus produces gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. You've heard about that, maybe talking about periods. That's what stimulates FSH and LH to then stimulate estrogen production and ovulation, and then progesterone production when you ovulate. GnRH is not just about reproduction. It's also about what's called neurogenesis, or it is actually the hormone that the hypothalamus produces that helps to grow new brain cells, to improve the brain cells, to actually, we thought neurogenesis didn't happen. We thought the brain you have, you got, right? You can never fix it. But we now know that that hormone actually changes the brain and makes it healthier and function better. So what happens to a menopausal woman who doesn't get hormone support or isn't taking hypothalamic support? What is she more prone to as she ages compared to the reproductive woman? She gets brain fog, she gets mild dementia. She's more prone to Alzheimer's than a male is. She's not making that GnRH anymore.
Right, exactly.
So that's the brain aging. One of the things with the hypothalamus is that the hypothalamus becomes inflamed. That inflammation then causes a cascade of symptoms throughout the entire body. So all the cells start the same process. We're all on the same body clock. We're all on the same biological clock. So your hypothalamus clock and your stomach cells clocks and your femur cell clocks, they're all on the same clock. So if the hypothalamus starts aging, everybody starts aging. It's the master clock.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That does. That's super helpful. I know.
I know this is kind of
I was like,
science.
oh no, is she going to say that we can stop menopause?
You can slow it down. So for
Yes.
instance, when I started supporting my hypothalamus nutraceutically and understanding the pillars of hypothalamic health and doing all that, which meant I had to change my diet and my exercise was way too vigorous and I had to get some sleep, I had to change my mindset. So I had to do all those 5 things to really heal it. I was able to stave off menopause for 10 years after my sisters. We lived very similar lifestyles. We all have always eaten Mediterranean diet. We handle stress maybe a little bit differently. We all have about similar body sizes, although they have a little more body fat. So they had normal periods, etc. So they had normal hormones coming into this. And we exercise about the same. The only difference was I was supporting my hypothalamus nutraceutically, and they went through their menopause about mid 40s, and I didn't go till the mid 50s, which was what my mom did. So we should have followed mom.
Right.
But we didn't.
Well,
They
modern
do.
society might have something to do with that,
Oh,
but
it absolutely does.
we'll talk about that. Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking about these signs and symptoms, it's just basically everything, right? I mean, at the end of the
It
day.
really, it's the master controller of everything. And
Right.
it's ignored because your doctor can't measure the hormones from, or your nurse practitioner, your healthcare provider can't measure the hormones from your hypothalamus to figure out what's going on. They have to
Right.
be a bit of a medical detective looking at the lower hormones, adrenal and thyroid and your reproductive hormones, and taking your symptoms and your signs, symptoms, what you're complaining of, signs, what we see on your body, and put it all together and deduce that it's the hypothalamus that's dysfunctional.
Right. So that's what I was just going to ask you actually about specific blood tests or markers or anything that you would be looking at to indicate hypothalamic dysfunction.
I do, and they're very specific. So I'm going to refer your audience to my hypothalamus handbook. I actually have the
Okay.
list in there of everything that your healthcare provider should be looking at, and I explain it to you as the audience. But I also have a healthcare provider section in there for them, which gives them the reference values. But I explain to you as the audience why we're looking at each thing. So I'll give you one. I already talked about TSH, T4, and T3. That's classic hypothalamic issues. But one hormone that almost is never checked that is really classic for hypothalamic dysfunction is prolactin. So
Yeah.
prolactin should be checked between 8 and 9 a.m. And that's when it should be down. It's falling down from its high nocturnal levels down to daytime levels. So it doesn't have to be extraordinarily high like you have a tumor to be abnormal. If it's dyscircadian, if it's high between 8 and 9, it means that your hypothalamus isn't producing enough dopamine or somatostatin, which is growth hormone inhibiting hormone, but it also inhibits prolactin. If it's not producing enough of that, it's dysfunctional and it won't turn prolactin off. And what prolactin does in pregnancy is it blocks your receptor sites for your steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So all those hormones feeding the pregnancy doesn't make you grow something you don't want, like a melanoma or a tumor. So it's blocking your hormones. It's upregulating your immune system, which is the hormone of the immune system, is prolactin, and it's helping the baby develop its immune system. And if prolactin's high during the day, which I see a lot, dyscircadian prolactinemia, it's almost always in a person who has central obesity, central hypothyroidism, central adrenal issues. They have hypothalamic dysfunction or they have autoimmune conditions.
And that definitely makes sense. And
And
it,
that's just one hormone I look at. So,
well,
but
that's what I was going to say, right? I imagine there's a lot more, and it just got me thinking about PCOS, and this is obviously the most prevalent condition amongst women that causes, for infertility. And I just was thinking about the influence on metabolism and all of these other issues. And prolactin can be high with PCOS in many cases. So, and obviously FSH and LH are oftentimes dysregulated. Can you speak to that condition in particular?
So PCOS is basically a metabolic disorder. So it's an inflammatory disorder. While the hormones are off, your androgens are high, DHEA is high, testosterone's high, you're in estrogen dominance, you're not producing enough progesterone because you're not ovulating. Those are all like the big things that we see. But the underlying mechanism is insulin resistance in the theca cells and insulin resistance in the hypothalamus. So your theca cells are in the ovary are the cells that are the primordial cells that are going to produce the oocytes, okay? But they also produce testosterone to start with, and testosterone then is converted into estradiol. So if the theca cells become insulin resistant, they never convert from testosterone to estradiol in enough. So you get high androgen levels. And because you have this interruption between this high levels of testosterone, funky levels of estrogen, and the hypothalamus doesn't trigger ovulation to occur. So then you don't produce enough progesterone to counterbalance the estrogen. Your estrogen may not be too high. It's just dominant compared to progesterone. You need to make 10 to 50 times more progesterone than estrogen in order for the estrogen not to be dominant.
Right.
So those hormone levels that you're measuring, there's an underlying issue there, and that's that resistance to insulin at the theca cell and in the hypothalamus that dysregulates the whole communication. And then that high testosterone causes the androgen effects, the hirsutism. The insulin resistance causes the weight gain. central obesity that we'll see in some PCOS patients, obviously not ovulating. It's interesting though, that since I've been focusing on the hypothalamus, I used to do a lot of infertility work. I worked in women's health after doing family practice, did women's health, and then went back to family practice with an integrative edge in my own practice. But during my women's health practice, I did a lot of infertility work. And then I had to give lots of hormones and lots of counseling. But once I started my own practice and looked at it more from a nutritional basis and started, develop, like, what could I feed the hypothalamus to fix this problem? I have not had to do that infertility work. The majority of my PCOS patients and my customers with PCOS, they get pregnant just feeding their hypothalamus with the nutraceutical within 3 to 6 months, unless their fallopian tubes are blocked or their spouse has funky sperm. But even if they have an autoimmune condition, they're like attacking the sperm, the spouse's sperm. You've heard of that with infertility issues. That actually shifts and changes when they start supporting their hypothalamus. They're no longer attacking his foreign cells.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to elaborate on that? I don't know that I've talked too extensively about that on the podcast, about that issue happening.
So some infertility issues have to do, let's say you're having normal periods and you are ovulating, and we measure your progesterone and you're making enough progesterone to support the pregnancy, but you can't maintain the pregnancy for some reason. Okay. And giving you more progesterone doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is that your body is producing antibodies against your husband's or spouse's sperm. Okay. So your partner's sperm is seen as a foreign body. Now it is a foreign body. It's not your cell. Yeah. But when you're ovulating, that cervical mucus that you make kind of protects that sperm so that your body doesn't see it as foreign. It kind of coats it. It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And it's going to coat it and say, come on in. We've got somebody for you to meet. We got an egg up here for you to meet. Okay. But when that's not happening, that cervical mucus isn't doing its job properly, your immune system says, oh my gosh, we have a foreign invader. It would attack a bacteria in there. It's going to attack those spermatozoa, and it destroys them before they even get there. Or if they do penetrate into the zona, the outside layer of the ovum to try to fertilize that ovum, it'll attack the little embryo and destroy it before you even know you're pregnant.
That is such helpful information, I think, for anyone who's dealing with this. And like you said, right, giving more progesterone doesn't solve the problem. But I feel like it makes so much sense from the perspective that these conditions like endo, PCOS, all of these ones that adeno that contribute to, fertility challenges in so many patients, they all have immune system underpinnings. So it all makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And one of the things you need to think about, if your hypothalamus's job is to help you survive, and you're not healthy enough to do so because your hypothalamus is dysfunctional and you're off, but you feel okay, but you can't get pregnant, there's a reason for that. So the hypothalamus is trying to keep you from getting pregnant because you're not healthy enough to get pregnant, nor do you have the resources for that fetus. Yeah. So so if we get your hypothalamus healthy, we don't have to do a lot of that underlying work. Right. It may take 3 to 6 months. It may take a little bit longer, but most of the time in a healthy young woman who is just having central issues and she doesn't know it, she just is having trouble getting pregnant, getting her hypothalamus healthy, she'll get pregnant and maintain the pregnancy without any support.
And I feel like that just goes across the board for really any menstrual cycle related issue, yeah,
not just pregnancy.
Issues, adrenals, exactly.
Yeah, irregularity, heavy, painful periods, really severe PMS, premenstrual dysphoria. It's all because that central controller is out of balance.
So interesting, because I feel like this is very much a top-down approach, which I've always talked about. It's like, get your cortisol and your blood sugar under control, and a lot of problems will resolve themselves. So I really appreciate even going higher up. But obviously those are just sort of like downstream from higher up, but I just feel like one of the issues that we just continue to see is the spot treating of all these different conditions. Like everything is just sort of siloed off in modern medicine, and it's just so challenging. So I think it's really refreshing to hear you speak about this in quite simplistic terms, so that it's clear that there is an avenue to feeling better, and it's really just addressing like the very, very top of the food chain.
Mm-hmm. We call it upstream medicine versus downstream. So the
Yes,
majority of
love
practitioners
that.
practice downstream. And it's easier to do that. And it's also what you have time for. In a typical practice, you only have, 10, 15, 20 minutes. You don't have enough time to do the investigation to figure out what's going on at the core. What's the root issue? And so it may take you multiple visits to even figure that out, and a lot of time is wasted. And most healthcare practitioners aren't very well versed in nutrition or lifestyle management. So your primary care provider may be your diagnostician, but isn't giving you the resources and the counseling you need. So you've got to seek, a nutritionist, a dietitian, an exercise physiologist, a sleep specialist, instead of getting everything in one spot. Because although they know that helps, they don't have the counseling skills to help you through that process, or the time
Right.
so
Yeah.
medicine's real kind of split up. And that's, and this is same with the specialties. We split the body up and we don't look at it as a whole. And one of the things in integrative medicine is we're integrating complementary therapies like nutraceuticals and energy healing and stress reduction and all of that kind of stuff, along with conventional medicine. We're doing both. Sometimes an antibiotic is the best choice for my patients, not the herb. But my patients know that I'm only going to offer them what looks like is going to work the best, whether I'm borrowing from conventional medicine or complementary medicine, because I
Right.
do both. You have the whole potpourri, not
Yes.
just not just one thing I can offer you.
Well, that's what it should be across the board, but that's a conversation for another day. I do want to segue into strategies and lifestyle
Mhm.
changes to optimize hypothalamic function and obviously improve our menstrual cycles and all of those symptoms that you mentioned. I feel like the vast majority of my listeners experience at least one of all the things you just talked about. So, how do we start to regulate our hypothalamus for overall well-being?
So number one is, I would say sleep would be like at the top. So getting that 7 to 9 hours of sleep in the dark, turning off your devices before, after dusk, so you're not getting exposed to that blue light and you can make enough melatonin, getting into a good sleep hygiene where you're actually triggering your hypothalamus. It recognizes when you're putting your jammies on, you've taken that warm bath, you've sprayed lavender on your pillows. It sets your hypothalamus for nocturnal mode. Okay, we don't want surges of cortisol at night. We want lots of melatonin. We want that prolactin to bump up and clean house in terms of our immune system, and then turn off in the morning, getting up with the sunlight. So a good circadian rhythm is number one. Number two is, what are you putting into your diet, into your body, nutrition wise? So I like the Mediterranean diet, not just because I grew up with it, because studies show that across the board, it lowers, cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, most of the major chronic illnesses. It's fairly easy to follow. It's plant-based. You get enough protein for your lean body mass, which is minimum a 0.5 gram per pound of lean body mass. If you don't know your lean body mass, you can go online and look at the Navy calculator and put in your weight, your height, your gender, your age. It has a few measurements, neck, waist, and hips, and it'll calculate, and it's pretty accurate. If you're average, if you're super fit and athletic, it's a little off. It'll be a little high. If you're grossly obese, it's really accurate. So if you're between average and really obese, it's going to be very accurate to what your actual lean body mass is and what your body fat is. You should be feeding your body a 0.5 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass minimum per day, minimum. Okay. If you're under lean body mass, you're like got sarcopenia, you've lost muscle and bone, then you need even more protein. And then it has healthy levels of fat, especially those monounsaturated fats and the polyunsaturated fatty acids that are rich in omega-3. So Mediterranean diet. Okay, so
Oh
that's
yeah.
two. Three, activity. If you're sitting around on your butt, your hypothalamus is basically going to lower your metabolism because you're not expending energy. Exercise stimulates proper optimal hypothalamic function. Over exercise, no, but just the right amount for your body. So minimum, what I would say is about 20 minutes, 3 times a week of aerobic activity where you get your heart rate in that aerobic zone, and a couple times a week of some kind of weight resistance body conditioning, and then stretching on a daily basis. 1 day a week in LSD, long, slow distance. So when you do a long hike or a long bike ride or a long walk, you actually trigger your hypothalamus to start to go into your fat cells for energy. It takes about 45 minutes for the average person to burn their 400 calories of stored glycogen in their muscles and their liver. So it's going to, if you're super fit, it'll take you longer. If you're really not fit at all and you're very overweight, it'll take you less time, but 45 minutes is kind of the average. So you got to go longer than 45 minutes to get in those fat stores. Okay, so activity, we've got sleep, got nutrition, mindset. If you don't believe you can heal, I don't have enough great bioidentical creams, enough nutraceutical, and I don't have enough of anything to get over a mindset that believes in your demise, believes in I'm never going to get pregnant, believes in I'll never, I have osteoporosis, I have diabetes, I'll never get well. You have the ability to cure almost anything. We're not a lizard and can't replace that missing limb yet, but we don't have the science for that. But you can get over almost anything. So there's got to be a change in mindset, and there may be some stuff in your subconscious, because your hypothalamus is the gatekeeper to your brain and your cognition, but also to your subconscious. It's not going to let you deal with your subconscious if the lower body is unhealthy. So once that gets healthy, which I see with these other pillars and the nutraceutical support, then what's going on in your subconscious you're going to be aware of. So healing beliefs that you don't even realize, like, I'm 40 years old now, I'm turning into my mother, and she had hypertension and diabetes. And no. If you believe that, you'll become that. But if not, you can change that. So mindset is number 4, and number 5 is nutraceutical support.
I was just going to ask you about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nutraceutical support. So is there anything out there? Yes, I did create something. There is one other thing out there that works, but doesn't work for very long, and that's glandulars. Hypothalamic glandulars have been used for eons to actually help people with hormone issues. But glandulars only have about a 3, maximum of 6-month window of use before they become a toxin in the body. And glandulars themselves don't cover all the other issues with the neuro-immune endocrine system. So I wanted to stay away from glandulars because I wanted a foundational type of nutrition that was plant-based. So I actually dreamt again of my formula and put it together. Back in 2003, I finally manufactured it. It's called Genesis Gold, and it has the amino acids that you need to support hypothalamic function, the polyunsaturated fatty acids that are omega-3 rich in the form of seaweeds to support proper hypothalamic function, and the phytonutrients in a variety of microdose botanicals and whole plant foods to support hypothalamic function. All 3 of those categories have research to prove that that's what the hypothalamus needs. Okay.
Amazing.
So that it's in a powder form, you drink it every morning. And like I said, with my women who have, amenorrhea, infertility, irregular periods, early perimenopause, they'll see improvement within 3 to 6 months. It's not going to work fast. This is not, I take a pill and it goes away. You're out of balance. You've been out of balance a while. The hypothalamus needs at least 3 months to get things back into balance.
Which makes so much sense. I mean, this is exactly what I speak about all the time. Like, there are no quick fixes for something like this. I always tell women, if you've been dealing with these kinds of problems for a decade, give yourself a month of healing for every year you've been experiencing something.
Absolutely. That is my formula.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. We're so on the same page. And
Oh.
I just love everything you shared, because it's just further reinforces the fact that we're all on the right track here, speaking to our clients and patients about what exactly it is they need to get back in balance. And I think one of the challenges, and I'm sure you come up against this all the time, is that modern life is so conducive to hypothalamic imbalance. And so you're just feeling, I feel like a lot of women feel like they're just swimming upstream or fighting a losing battle. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it can be difficult. One of the things that has helped me is learning to listen to my body and learning to listen to my intuition. and I'm a, I have a lot of education. I was valedictorian. I'm a brainy person. So my reasoning always wants to say, oh, we should be doing this way. That's what led to my disordered eating and body image. Back in the day, fat was the devil. And so I ate non-fat everything, and then had a child that had learning disabilities because I had enough fat in my system. So that was from my head, not from my intuition. Okay. So one of the things that I found is when you're feeding your hypothalamus this nutraceutical, your body starts talking to you. So for instance, not only did I get my periods back within the first 2 months, I always suffered from seasonal affective disorder, which means you don't make enough serotonin when the time changes in the fall. So you get depressed, you can gain some weight, you just feel crappy. You feel like a low-level depression. I was on the Genesis Gold for probably about 6 months before it was time for the fall equinox. And normally, like, I can't stand that time because I'm going to get depressed. I'm going to be depressed until spring. I started craving orange vegetables like chocolate. I couldn't get enough pumpkins, yam, butternut squash. I'm eating just eating these orange vegetables. I have not had seasonal affective disorder since. Every fall, I crave it for about 6 weeks into the fall, and I need the beta carotene. I need something from those orange vegetables, and it balances my brain chemistry.
That's
So,
so
and that's what
awesome.
my patients have reported, and customers. It's like, I'm craving these weird things. I'm like, go with it. Unless it's like rocks or something, go with it. More exercise, less exercise, more hugs, more sleep. What are you craving? More social contact. What foods are you craving? And because your body will talk to you if you listen.
Yeah. We just have to learn how to decipher what it means exactly. This was amazing. Oh my goodness. You shared so much good information. I want you to tell everyone about your book because I'm sure there's much more to be had in there.
Yes. So the Hypothalamus Handbook is my newest book. You probably have seen it. So I wrote it for both you, the audience, and I also wrote it for your healthcare provider. So it's in story form in the sense that I have case studies. I have 6 case studies, including a young woman with infertility issues, but I have middle-aged woman, I have middle-aged man, a young man, I've got a transgender person, and I also have a child in there with learning disabilities. So you can see from the beginning of them coming into my office, and they're giving me their story, how I would work them up. And they're all complicated. They don't just have one issue. Okay, they've got multiple issues, which is usually what I see. Then I go through each one of their issues and explain how that issue is related to the hypothalamus. So the first part of the book is, what is your hypothalamus? What is hypothalamic dysfunction? What are the symptoms? What kind of blood work should your provider be looking at? And then I go into all these case studies. And then I go into all the pillars I talked about and go into detail about like what you should eat and your exercise and sleep and nutrition, everything, mindset. And then the 4th section is for your healthcare provider. And it's written the way we like our stuff. Etiology, pathophysiology, all of that, shorter. And then after that is a huge amount of references. You may be interested in it. Your health provider will definitely be. And there's a bunch of pages at the end for you to take notes because you're going to want to. But you can also sign up, go to my website, and you'll get the download of all the diets, all the exercises, and the blood wish list that I get used for all of my patients, male and female separated, that you can take to your healthcare provider and say, this is what I think you need to look at.
That's amazing.
And here's the book that you need. Kind of a thing. So that is the book is on Amazon. You can find the Hypothalamus Handbook there. I also have something free for you guys. I have something called the Hormone Reboot Training. So if you go to my website, genesisgold.com, Hormone Reboot Training is based on my very first book called Hormones in Harmony, which is way more story form and more graphics. It's not quite as sciencey, and I don't go into case studies in depth. It's a shorter book, but it's basically a book course. So you get the book as a PDF, like an ebook, and then you go through the whole course and I explain to you how your gut works, what your thyroid's doing, what your adrenals. I go through all your hormones in your gut, etc., and explain all of that in this book. And it allows you, but it's in like a video form, so you can learn in different ways. And that's free. That's free for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like everyone is going to be running to get this book and also possibly your supplements. And I just really appreciate all this knowledge and you also sharing your birth story and how that just impacted your whole life and the work that you do. So thank you so much, Deborah. This was amazing.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.